It all began when Pasadena was barely 17 years old. A railroad to the stars from Pasadena to Mount Wilson. The world's greatest mountain enterprise. It was the dream of two men, David J Macpherson, a brilliant young civil engineer who designed the Pasadena Mt. Wilson Railroad, and Professor Thaddeus S. Lowe, a wealthy inventor who provided the financial backing to build the railroad. Incorporated June 2nd, 1891, the Pasadena Mt. Wilson Railroad was busy making plans. It was to be a combination of beautiful mountain hotels and glens and a scenic railroad operated entirely by electricity, the first of its kind in the world. Like all great enterprises, however, the railroad was not without setbacks. To Lowe and Macpherson's dismay, they soon learned that the Pasadena Mt. Wilson Railroad existed on paper only, for they were unable to gain any concessions from the owners of the property leading to Mount Wilson. Undaunted, they conducted another survey. A close examination of Macpherson's original map to Mount Wilson showed the right-of-way passing through a place called Rubio Canyon. 1,300 feet above Rubio Canyon lay Echo Mountain, which would provide a breathtaking setting for a mountain hotel. A new objective had been found, Echo Mountain, 3,500 feet above the sea. The first leg of the trip from Mountain Junction in Altadena to Rubio Canyon would be a standard electric trolley route. Rubio Canyon would provide a beautiful setting for a hotel and entertainment pavilion built between the walls of the canyon. From Rubio to Echo Mountain, passengers would be carried up the Great Incline by cable cars. Upon reaching the summit of Echo Mountain, 3,500 feet above sea level, guests would lodge at the spacious Echo Mountain House, which provided a magnificent view of Southern California. In December 1891, Professor Lowe drove the first stake marking the beginning of construction. The starting point for this unique railroad was called Mountain Junction in Altadena, just north of the city of Pasadena. The setting was the beautiful high mesa and mountains above Altadena, and they looked deceptively inviting. In reality, the task was Herculean. 3 separate operations were underway simultaneously. The roadbed to Rubio, including the hotel and pavilion, the Great Incline, and construction of the Echo Mountain House and the smaller chalet atop Echo Mountain. Most of the roadbed into Rubio Canyon had to be blasted out from perpendicular cliffs. In several sections, rock drilling crews hung suspended by ropes down the face of the cliffs in order to obtain a foothold for the railway. At some points, poles for the trolley wires would have to be set in solid rock. Owing to the steep and difficult terrain, most of the grading and filling necessary was done by hand, a back-breaking task that was to take over a year to complete. During one of his many visits to the construction site, Lowe made a trip with friends to a mountain peak west of Mount Wilson. Upon learning that the summit had no other name than Oak Mountain, his friends promptly renamed it Mount Lowe in honor of the developer. After the roadbed was completed to the foot of the incline at Rubio Canyon, rails were laid and flatbed cars pulled by horses were now able to bring in larger quantities of supplies. Grading on the incline had been completed, and the men could now begin laying ties, starting at the base of the incline and working up. Before track could be laid, however, a 40-foot chasm had to be bridged. The inventive Macpherson was equal to the task, designing a 200-foot-long trestle with the upper portion of the bridge being 114 feet higher than the lower portion. It was appropriately named the Macpherson Trestle. When permanent rails were in place, temporary rollers were installed and a rope let down from the top of Echo Mountain to the base of the incline some 3,000 feet away. It was securely attached to a 3,000-pound construction cable which was then pulled to the top with the windlass powered by 8 horses. The cable may be seen in the lower left corner. It took over 2 hours to haul the cable to the top. With the construction cable in place, supplies were unloaded from flat cars at the base of the incline and hauled to the top of Echo Mountain in an endless procession of material for the city on the mountain. When the supplies crossed Macpherson Trestle, they were traversing some of the most rugged terrain in the Sierra Madre mountain range. The small construction camp at Echo Mountain began to grow, moving from a tent kitchen operation to its first permanent building. Although it would not be ready for opening day, work was being rushed on Echo Mountain House, the larger of the 2 hotels on the mountain. It was the apple of Professor Lowe's eye, and he planned to make it the showplace of Southern California. The smaller hotel, the Chalet, was located on the eastern bluff overlooking Rubio Canyon and would definitely be ready for opening day. Perhaps the most poignant episode in the history of the Mount Lowe Railroad is that of Almarian William Decker, the remarkable engineer from the Edison Company, who designed and supervised the installation of the electrical system of the mountain railroad. Decker, shown in front to the left of Professor Lowe, fought a lifelong losing battle with tuberculosis. He was so dedicated to the success of the electrical system for the railroad that nearly every day he was carried in a cot to the base of Rubio Canyon where he could supervise the installation of the electrical equipment. Decker's dedication to the railroad cost him his life, for he died at the age of 41, less than a month after the opening of the line. In the beginning, electrical power was supplied by a combination of generating stations at Pasadena Junction, Rubio Canyon, and Echo Mountain. In 1899, however, the Edison Company, predecessor to the Southern California Edison Company, provided all the electricity necessary to operate the railroad from a steam generating plant in Los Angeles and a motor generator set in Edison's Pasadena substation. The incline mechanism was the invention of Andrew Holliday, who engineered the cable railway over the hills of San Francisco. 2 cable cars were attached to opposite ends of an endless cable. While one car was pulled to the top of the incline, the other car would descend to the base of the incline at Rubio Canyon. The cable itself was 1.5 inches in diameter, made from the finest steel available. The huge bull wheel around which the cable revolved was 9 feet in diameter with 72 automatic grips arranged so that 45 of them were gripping at the same time. When the cable reached the bull wheel, it was reduced to 13 revolutions a minute. A year and 7 months, 2.5 miles of electric railway from Pasadena to Rubio Canyon, 3,000 feet of cable incline railway over a 62% grade from Rubio to Echo Mountain, hand-carved by men, mules, picks, shovels, and dynamite. Their construction job, the most challenging in the world, was completed. By June 21st, 1893, both the trolley line and the incline had been successfully tested with electrical power. The first passenger cars were ingeniously converted from flatbed work cars by the addition of benches and a canopy. July 4th, 1893, the opening of the Mount Lowe Railroad. At Mountain Junction, crowds were waiting in line to ride the first trolley cars to a place called Rubio Canyon. Over 400 people paid $5 each for a round-trip ticket on opening day. As they left familiar surroundings, the passengers were thrilled to find the tracks curving gently into the natural beauty of the canyon. Greater still was their delight to find a magnificent hotel and entertainment pavilion dropped, as if by magic, between the walls of Rubio Canyon. For most, it was a pine-scented fairyland. The dining room beneath the upper pavilion was some 35 feet by 110 feet in size. Guests could view the splendor of Rubio Canyon while enjoying fresh-grown fruits and flowers at each table. And though not many knew it, During the early history of California, this very spot was the hideout of the notorious bandit Vasquez. Trails, bridges, and stairs took visitors over and around sparkling streams, to fern glens and cameo pools. At night, 2,000 Japanese lanterns lit the area, turning streams, trees, and canyon walls into a dreamland of light and color. The upper pavilion boasted one of the finest and largest dance floors in Southern California and was the scene of many a gala weekend party. But now the moment everyone had been waiting for. Word had come down from the top of the incline.
Hello, Rubio. This is Superintendent Carter. Stand by for passengers from Echo Mountain.
Every eye was riveted on the incline. The cable car had already left Rubio Pavilion and was on its way to Echo Mountain with the first passengers. The crowd watched as it disappeared in the distance. But where was the car from Echo? As if from heaven, with Old Glory flying and the crowd cheering mightily, the little white cable car finally appeared, descending gently to the Rubio Pavilion. As the car ascending the incline neared the summit, passengers saw for the first time the smaller hotel, the Chalet, which became popular from the start as a mountain resort and provided a dining room that overlooked the valley below. In the following year, the second and larger hotel, the Echo Mountain House, was ready. It was without doubt one of the finest and best equipped mountain resorts in the world. The hotel had an enchanting aroma of fresh pine, and the bill of fare was unsurpassed in Southern California. It was everything Lowe had hoped for, and included a delightful children's zoo. One of the most durable memories of Mount Lowe, for most Southern Californians, was the light that shone from Echo Mountain. The Great Searchlight had been one of the most popular attractions at the Chicago World's Fair, and later the San Francisco Fair. It so intrigued Lowe that at the close of the San Francisco Fair, he purchased the instrument and had it shipped and installed at Echo Mountain. It weighed 6,000 pounds and stood 11 feet high. Its 3 million candle power was projected to all corners of Southern California over a distance of 150 miles. The city on the mountain also boasted one of the finest observatories in California, for it was one of Professor Lowe's ambitions to make Echo Mountain the astronomical center of the world. The Mount Lowe Railroad had arrived. Overnight, Pasadena had become the Mecca for travelers from all over the world who wanted to visit the world's greatest mountain railroad. But there was more to come, for Professor Lowe was a man of vision, and David Macpherson an imaginative engineer. They planned an extension of the railroad from Echo Mountain to another resort at Crystal Springs, 5 miles into the mountains behind Echo Mountain. Once again, Macpherson was called upon to engineer a miracle, the design and construction of the Alpine division of the Mount Lowe Railroad. When construction finally did get underway, much of the right-of-way had to be blasted from the side of the mountains. It took a team of highly skilled construction men 8 months to carve the opening through Granite Gate alone. The Sierra Madre Mountains resisted stubbornly, providing no easy route to Crystal Springs. In many places, substantial bridges and heavy trestles were required to overcome problems created by the rugged terrain. Water and supplies were constantly in demand to maintain the construction crews, and work went on in spite of a heavy winter. 2 years later, August 1895, the Alpine section had been completed. From an elevation of 3,500 feet at Echo Mountain to 5,000 feet at Crystal Springs. 5 miles of steel, 127 curves, and 18 bridges, the most daring of which was Circular Bridge, 500 feet in length. The upper end was 20 feet higher than the lower, and seemed to go right into space before returning to the mountains. It was one of the most spectacular viewpoints of the entire trip. And Granite Gate, an almost insurmountable barrier of solid rock. For 8 months, men had scraped, clawed, and blasted until finally they had carved a narrow pass for the railroad. With the last major obstacle overcome, the first open-air trolley car made its way over Circular Bridge and through Granite Gate toward Alpine. By November 1895, the first version of the Alpine Tavern had been completed. Guests were delighted to find this comfortable lodge awaiting them at the end of their trip from Echo Mountain. Unfortunately, the financial depression of 1896 began to take its toll. Patronage declined, and before Professor Lowe could recover his huge investment, he lost control of his railroad. In the next few years, the railroad changed hands several times. Ironically, as if the mountains resented any owner but Professor Lowe, the first of several tragedies struck at Echo Mountain. In the pre-dawn hours of February 5th, 1900, fire burned the Echo Mountain house to the ground. On December 9th, 1905, a wind of hurricane velocity battered the summit of Echo Mountain for 24 hours. The chalet was completely demolished and started a fire that destroyed everything on the mountain with the exception of the observatory. By now, Pacific Electric owned the Mount Lowe Railroad, and significant improvements were begun immediately. The hotels at Echo Mountain were not rebuilt. Instead, a new powerhouse was erected at the top of the incline, and passengers were routed directly through to Alpine Tavern. The new theme was, out with the old, in with the new. Modernize, advertise. There was an extensive advertising campaign on billboards and in all the best magazines and newspapers. The world's greatest mountain trip, $2.50 round trip. From Pasadena, $2 round trip. All you needed was a ticket. Business improved immediately, and the big red cars began to bring people from every corner of Southern California. At the base of the incline, every eye turned toward the summit as they waited for the cable car that would lift them to the clouds. What was it like to ascend the Great Incline? Let's join some early motion picture cameramen as they record the trip.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I call your attention to the incline mechanism. Each car is attached to a 1.5-inch endless cable of the very finest steel, tested to a strength of 100 tons. As an extra safeguard, you'll observe a third cable, which works through an automatic clutch beneath the car. Although the incline will change grade from 62% to 48%, each car is arranged to keep the passengers level at all times. We are now approaching the Macpherson Trestle, spanning one of the canyons of the Sierra Madre Mountains. Exactly halfway up, we will make a turnout to allow the down souvenir photo.
We'll probably never know how many thousands had a souvenir photo taken at the top of the incline. Maybe the old sign knows. Alpine Tavern, 5,000 feet above the sea. Mount Lowe, 6,100 feet. Echo Mountain, 3,500 feet above the sea. Not everyone took the trip lightly, however.
All aboard for Alpine Tavern. All aboard, please.
The old Alpine Tavern underwent many improvements, enlarging the building to accommodate more guests and provide better service. Even the name was changed to the Mount Lowe Tavern. The tavern engaged some of the finest chefs in Southern California, and dinner at Mount Lowe was a never-to-be-forgotten experience. Hikers thoroughly enjoyed the many trails that led from the tavern, each with its own special view of hidden canyons and wildlife. And for those who still preferred to ride, An open-air train powered by one sleepy mule made an additional scenic excursion from Inspiration Point, sometimes on schedule. It wasn't exactly the straightest line between 2 points, and you wouldn't set a speed record getting there. Still, it was all part of the charm. Inspiration Point was a short stroll from the tavern and provided a panoramic view of Southern California unmatched anywhere. At night, it was a dazzling spectacle of lights from Pasadena to Catalina Island. The areas surrounding the tavern were dotted with additional accommodations, ranging from small overnight cabins to comfortable family-sized cabins and housekeeping bungalows fully equipped for extended vacations. Yep, everything was up to date at Mount Lowe, except for one thing. They still had to supply the outlying areas by pack train. It was time to bring in an automobile. The car could be carried to the summit of the incline, all right, but who had the nerve to drive it over the 5 miles of narrow mountain track to the tavern? The call went out. Find 2 daring and sober young men for a perilous mission. Oh, no! 2 men were finally found, and the breathtaking trip to the tavern was successfully completed with the delivery of a sparkling new 1915 Metz Roadster. Total purchase price, $475. And that's why they call these the good old days. Professor Lowe was gone, and finally so were his beautiful hotels and observatory at Echo Mountain, the pavilion and waterfalls at Rubio Canyon, and in the end, the Mount Lowe Tavern itself, victims of fire, wind, and storms. Gone, too, are the sounds of the big red cars that served Mount Lowe and all of Southern California. Victims of progress? The Great Incline, a shadow in the underbrush. The incline mechanism and bull wheel that once pulled the cable cars were located in the powerhouse at the top of the incline. Today, the giant wheel is the last surviving piece of the Mount Lowe Railroad, marking the spot where the powerhouse once stood. The old railroad lasted 45 years, from 1893 to the final run in 1938. It had helped make Pasadena famous over the face of the earth, and in its time had rightly been called the greatest mountain enterprise in existence. To Thaddeus Lowe and David Macpherson, however, it was reward enough to know they had brought joy to countless thousands who made the unforgettable trip to Mount Lowe aboard their railroad. Is it really all gone? Well, oddly enough, many Pasadenans will tell you that when conditions are just right, when the clouds cover the mountaintops and it's strangely quiet, you can still hear the sounds of the incline and the trolley cars and the happy voices of passengers on their way to Mount Lowe. You know, could be.